Welcome to Management in Minutes, where we discuss how to lead on purpose at the office, in your home, and in the world. I'm your host, Charles Evans. Welcome to Season 2. Over the next 5 weeks, we are going to do something that we haven't done before. We are going to build a series, week by week, that I'm calling the Leadership Code. These are 5 characteristics that I believe are required in order to lead and direct a unit, a team, a program, an organization, or a family. Those characteristics are responsibility, courage, discipline, humility, and patience. And the order is intentional. Each one builds on the last. Each one is connected to a requirement that is demonstrated in practice. And together, they form a code that I believe separates leaders who endure from leaders who fade. We start today with the foundation, the one that everything else depends on, which is responsibility. Responsibility in the context of leadership is demonstrated in being the one who takes ownership of an outcome. This is the person who is in charge, not just in title, but also in accountability. This is the person who says, this project, this product, this process, it's mine. The outcome is mine. The success is mine to build, and the failure is mine to own. Now, this sounds simple, but it is one of the rarest behaviors in leadership. Because taking ownership out of the outcome means accepting that when something doesn't go wrong, well, okay, this sounds simple, but it is one of the rarest behaviors in leadership. Because taking ownership of the outcome means accepting that when something goes wrong, the first question you ask is not who failed, but what did I miss? It means standing in front of your team, your stakeholders, or your board and saying, this one is on me, even when there are a dozen external factors you could point to. It means resisting the very human instinct to protect yourself by distributing the blame. Responsibility matters because it is the foundation of trust. When a leader owns the outcome, the good and the bad, the team learns something critical. This person will not throw me under the bus. This person will not disappear when things go sideways. And that knowledge changes how people perform. They take more risks, they bring problems forward earlier, they commit more fully because they know the leader has their back. The leadership theory that best encapsulates responsibility is extreme ownership, which was developed by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. Both are former United States Navy SEAL officers who served together during the Battle of Ramadi in Iraq. After their service, they translated the leadership principles they learned on the battlefield into a framework for business and organizational leadership in their book, Extreme Ownership: How U.S. Navy SEALs Lead and Win. The core thesis of extreme ownership is this: leaders must own everything in their world. There is no one else to blame. When a mission fails, the leader doesn't look at the team, the circumstances, or the resources. The leader looks in the mirror. The question is never, why did they fail? The question is always, what could I have done to set them up for success? Extreme ownership's formula is straightforward. There are no bad teams, only bad leaders. If the team isn't performing, the leader hasn't communicated clearly enough, hasn't trained well enough, hasn't put the right people in the right positions, or hasn't created the conditions for success. The responsibility always flows to the top. Now, this is something that we always see in sports. After any major game, any big championship event, you will always see either the head coach or the quarterback or the best player on the team in the press conference. That person has to take responsibility for the outcome of the game. If it's a win, they get to distribute the credit to the rest of the team. But if they lose, then they take all the ownership for what happened on their shoulders, even when everyone knows it may not necessarily be all their fault. Sure, the coach doesn't control the quarterback that threw an interception or the wide receiver that dropped the pass, but the coach has to take responsibility for the preparation for that moment and the failure that happened in that moment. That's an example of taking responsibility and taking the responsibility from the position of being a leader. I want to share 3 ways responsibility shows up in leadership. The first way responsibility manifests is in owning the mission and its outcomes, all of them, not just the wins, not just the metrics that look good in the quarterly report, all of it. The budget variance that signals a process problem, the client complaint that reveals a gap in service, the turnover that tells you something about the culture you've built. When a leader owns the full outcome, they stop being a narrator of results and start being the architect of them. They move from reporting what happened to asking what they could have influenced differently. This is the shift from reactive leadership to proactive leadership, and it begins with the willingness to say, regardless of the circumstances, the outcome belongs to me. In practice, this means that when you present the results to your stakeholders, whether they are the board members, executives, clients, or even your family, you present them as yours. You don't buffer the bad news with caveats about what your team did wrong. You don't build a case for why external factors were to blame. You say, here's where we are. Here's what I'm going to do about it. Here's what I need. That kind of ownership changes the dynamic in the room because people trust leaders who stand in front of the results rather than behind the excuses. The second way responsibility manifests is in the leader's obligation to communicate the standard with absolute clarity. One of Willink and Babin's key principles is that if a team member doesn't understand the mission or the expectation, the fault lies with the leader, not the team member. The leader failed to communicate clearly enough for the message to be understood and executed. This is where most accountability breakdowns begin. The leader assumes the team understands the standard because it was mentioned in a meeting, or because it's written in a policy manual, or because they should know. But extreme ownership demands more than assumption. It demands confirmation. Did the team understand the standard? Can they articulate it back? Do they know what success looks like and what failure looks like? If the answer to any of those questions is no, the leader hasn't finished the job of communicating. And what this really tells us is that communication is not only key, but that over-communication is a sign of intentional leadership. We have to be crystal clear with our direct reports, with the members of our team, with our family about what success looks like so that they can also see that success when they're a part of creating it. The third manifestation of responsibility is perhaps the hardest. The leader is responsible for who is on the team and for the consequences of those decisions. To put it directly, the leader must endure the right people being in the right positions, and when they aren't, the leader must act. Not eventually, not when it's convenient, when the mission demands it. This means that when a hire doesn't work out, the leader doesn't get to say they interviewed well. The leader must own the selection process, the onboarding, and the development plan, because all three contributed to the outcome. When a team member isn't performing, the leader doesn't get to wait until the problem becomes undeniable. The leader must address it early, directly, and with the clarity we just discussed. Because letting a performance gap persist is a leadership failure, not an employee failure. This can be a hard lesson because everyone has their own autonomy. In truth, we can't own what someone else says or does, but we do have the responsibility for putting them in a position where they can do or say certain things. This is why performance evaluation is so critical, because it ensures we're keeping track of where our people are and how they are trending towards success. If they're not trending towards success, then it's our responsibility to address that as quickly and as thoroughly as possible. Otherwise, there'll be detrimental impacts on the team or the mission or the organization. So let's bring it all together. Responsibility is the first value in the leadership code because without it, nothing else is possible. You can't cast a vision if you won't own the outcome of pursuing it. You cannot enforce discipline if you're not willing to be accountable for the systems you build. You cannot practice humility if you haven't first accepted that the results belong to you. And you cannot endure with patience if you don't believe the mission is yours to carry. Extreme ownership gives us the framework. Leaders must own everything in their world. There is no one else to blame. When the mission succeeds, the leader gives credit to the team. When the mission fails, the leader looks in the mirror. Responsibility manifests itself in three ways in leadership. First, owning the mission and its outcomes, all of them, without buffering behind excuses. Second, communicating the standard with absolute clarity. Because if the team doesn't understand the expectation, the leader didn't finish the job. Third, building the team and accepting the consequences of those decisions, from hiring to development to the hardest conversations, is the leadership's responsibility. And responsibility is not a trait you're born with. It is a decision you make every morning when you walk through the door. It is the decision to be the person who steps forward when it will be easier to step back. That is where leadership begins, and that is where the leadership code starts. That's all for today. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share this podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube. And remember, leadership is a choice. And as always, lead on purpose. I'm Charles Evans, and this has been Management in Minutes.